All right, we are live. So thank you to everyone who's tuning in today for this month's 30 Under 30 live chat. For those who don't know me, my name is Emily Birds, and I'm the marketing coordinator here at the National Office of the NSCAA here in Kansas City. I'm also the 30 Under 30 program coordinator. So I will be one of your hosts for today. Today's topic is developing a competitive mindset, and I'm happy to have a great group of panelists here with me. Our alumni moderator today is Michael Herman with Holy Names University. Michael, thanks for being on today. And next, our panelists. So today with us, we have Raleigh DeRose from Brown University. Hi, Raleigh.
Hello.
Next, we have Laura Jackson with Florida Atlantic University. Thanks, Laura, for joining us. Dan Visser with Pittsburgh Riverhounds. Hi, Dan.
Hello.
And finally, Ben Stoddard with Oregon State University. Thanks for tuning in, Ben.
Thanks for having me.
All right, great. Well, we'll get right rolling. So, Michael, take it away.
All right, excited to get the chance to have this discussion about a competitive mindset. I think it's a great topic that we can focus on and everybody can benefit from. And it sounds like we've got a great panel to work with as far as having some insight into it. So we'll get started. And Raleigh, the first question is going to start with you. Just to kind of get us started off, what does a competitive mentality mean to you, and what does that encompass in the game of soccer?
So I've actually been talking to some of my colleagues about this topic since I've signed up, and I have been thinking about how I evaluate players both on my team and from a recruiting standpoint when it comes to, are they mentally competitive? Do they have the mindset to move forward? And I think I've come to the conclusion that to have a competitive mindset, it's the ability to want and to know how to move forward to achieve a goal or a motive. And I think that just transcends certainly physical. Obviously, the mental side is huge. And with the mental side, are you asking the appropriate questions? Are you seeking the appropriate support? And when adversity strikes your way, how do you deal with it? Do you get up, or do you, sit on the ground, or do you, make excuses? So I think those are the components that I would say scratch the surface of what it means to be competitive from a mental standpoint.
Okay, good. And then Ben, we'll go to you, and we'll ask kind of a follow-up to go with it. Is obviously you're in the college game as well. How do you look for that in terms of competitive mentality? How do you see that stand out? I know Raleigh talked about it a little bit, but how do you see that stand out when it comes in players, and how that comes into play in the game?
Yeah, that's a great question. You see it, at the beginning in the recruiting trail. When we're evaluating, obviously you want people who, in my case, it'll be young men who want to win, want their teams to do well, but then who also are trying to improve themselves. And so the biggest thing that we do at Oregon State, and it kind of just goes right into my methodology, is it's just simply just building relationships with these guys, getting to know them and seeing, okay, what motivates them, what makes them want to be a competitor, what kind of makes them tick. And then from there, I believe, a lot of just getting to know them will kind of, as Raleigh said, it'll kind of show through into their competitive mindset. And we want guys, everybody from the first guy on our roster to the 28th, to have a team mentality and want the team to do well. But then that kind of starts with them trying to be their best themselves, the best version of themselves. So, it starts right from the beginning, right when you first see them play, to the first phone call you have, and just building relationships from there.
Good. And then Dan, in terms of, you're in a slightly different, not necessarily being with the college game. How does that change? Is there a difference in the competitive mentality in your realm, or how does that, how does it come out in your kind of where you work?
Yeah. So I've been with the Riverhounds now since August. So whatever that is, 6 months or so, 8 months, maybe, whatever. But I've spent most of my coaching career at the college level. I think that's a question that I've asked myself, and Ben asked kind of since being with the Riverhounds, is kind of what are the big differences, and I keep landing on the differences actually aren't that big. And so I would say that it very much is kind of the same things that that Ben and Raleigh talked about. In that it's just not that different. How I might define competitive mentality is similar, I think, to the way the other two did. Ben mentioned a couple of things. Ben mentioned wanting to win. I think at its most basic form, that's probably how I would define a competitive mentality. He also, in his definition, mentioned just kind of trying to be at your best, and so that's kind of a competition within yourself. And so, yeah, I would say that definition applies to the pro game as much as it applies to the college game, and probably to other levels as well.
And then, Laura, we'll go to you. Kind of my last follow up with it is, you know, it actually touches on to a point what Dan said of, and I like what he said with win and being at your best. It kind of ties into, obviously, a lot of times if you go simple with thinking about competitive mindset, you think of winning, of being competitive. But at the same time, you know, there's sort of the competition within the competition. Do you have the competitive mindset in yourself to be the best you can be, to be better today than, you know, per se you were yesterday? Kind of how do you balance that, or what are your thoughts on that? Of, I guess you would almost say, like, what's the difference of a competitive mentality in terms of just winning versus also trying to develop yourself as a player?
Yeah, I think that in my mind, there's a big difference between someone that wants to win just for the sake of winning and will do whatever it takes to win. And then those that want to develop. I think, in my experience, those that have that developmental mentality, I think that they tend to have more of a competitive mindset just because they want to keep improving. And obviously they want to win, but there's an onus on them improving themselves and not just competing with the player they're playing against or the team they're playing against, but almost themselves. You know, everyone wants to win, but, you know, are you happy with your performance? And I think a real competitor might win a game, but they might play badly. And obviously you want to be positive about the win, but you want to be self-assess and make sure that the next time you compete, you're better than you were before. So for me, the developmental part is a big factor in having a competitive mindset.
I think that's a great focus in a way you brought it in terms of talking about having that competitive mindset. You might compete and win, but sometimes just being able to compete even when it's tough and realize, you know, some coaches talk about moral victories and having at least a fight to try to achieve something where it may not always result in a win, but at least it's you're competing and you're putting your best effort forward. And so I think, you know, that's always something that's important to understand, is that you can compete and lose at times, but what's your mentality through that? So that's good. When we kind of move forward with it and we talk about, we've talked about it developing and improving our players. Dan, the next question we'll start with you. How do you approach developing that mentality? How do you kind of attack it on a day-to-day basis? How do you attack it on an overall basis with a team, with an individual throughout the year?
Yeah, I think as I spent some time thinking about this question, the first thing that I probably thought about was really just really basically, can a competitive mindset or a competitive mentality be developed, or is that something that players kind of have or don't have by the time that they get to you? And so thinking about a question like this, I look to some other coaches that have been successful within competitive environments. I think if I'm thinking about competition, probably the first name that comes to mind is Anson Dorrance, who's you know, just really famous for being in a competitive environment at UNC. I've read some of his stuff. I mean, he talks about really recruiting girls that are extremely competitive. And I would say that versus recruiting talented girls and trying to then make them competitive, I would probably guess, and some others probably know him and that program better than me, but I would guess that he'd be willing to take a really competitive girl who's less of a soccer player than a really good soccer player who's not uber competitive. And so second example I looked at was a guy named Mark Schubert, who was an Olympic swim coach. He talked about just like attracting really competitive people. And then the last one that I looked at was Vince Lombardi, who I think is extremely well known for his competitiveness. And he talks about, I'd rather have a player with 50% ability and 100% desire than 100% ability and 50% desire. So each of these three people, and I think it's something that's worth noting, begin with competitive people. That being said, so I think there is some kind of innate drive that exists within people. I think within that, I do think it's possible to develop it further. And so, the first thing kind of relates to what I've been talking about, just that if we can bring on or recruit very competitive people and surround them with other very competitive people, that we allow them to then kind of sharpen each other. So I think the first part of it is just the recruitment process. Let's start with good raw material. That's number one. I've got kind of 4 ideas. The second one, and this is what, again, when I think of competitiveness, I think of Anson Dorrance probably first. He's famous for his competitive cauldron, which is just really keeping score of everything. So he starts by recruiting very competitive people, and then he allows them to compete. Some personal examples for me, I was the head coach of a small D3 school in the Boston area. We were not so great. My second spring there, just trying to kind of develop this competitive mentality within the team. What we did is for each training session, this was a spring, so we had less guys, maybe 15 or so. But I would basically keep them on a team for the entire training session, and at the end of the training session would have like a tally of the winning team. So and then what we did within that is we'd take a picture of the winning team for that day and post it on a board in the locker room, and just kind of kept that going throughout the whole spring. So try to make a big deal about winning within training. The other thing that I tried to do there is whatever kind of results that we might have is to post them publicly, whether that was a run or whatever, that all those things were posted and just visible, and tried to foster competition amongst the team. So that's 2. The second thing, or the third thing, sorry, was just I think keeping score has not always been, or kind of Anson Dorrance's competitive cauldron has not always been a part of my experience with the guy that I work for now, who I also played for, Dave Brandt. Anson Dorrance talks about he's created a competitive cauldron. He says some others create a competitive environment through the sheer force of their personality, is the word that he's used, and that's what I've seen Dave do very much. And I'd say that's similar to what I'd see in like a Vince Lombardi, just the sheer force of their personality. Both Dave and Vince Lombardi, I think, very much view competition as a challenge and a test of kind of your toughness, your strength, your manhood. Got a quote from Lombardi. It'd say, I would say that the quality of each man's life is the full measure of that man's personal commitment to excellence and to victory, whether it be football or whatever it might be. And then the fourth thing, and sorry if I'm getting kind of long-winded here, but the fourth thing is just connecting winning to the process of winning. I think it's something that both Raleigh and Ben talked about right away. Just that it's okay and to look at the end result, but let's look at the pathway to get there. And so that's the training environment, that's eating right, that's sleeping right, that's on rest days, resting right. And so, yeah, I think that can be done through just conversations. Ben talked about relationships, building trust with players, and then using that relationship as a platform to say, hey, here are the things that get us to win. We all want to win, sure, but these are the things that get us there. So yeah, those are my thoughts on the topic.
No, I mean, I think that was very in depth and covers a number. Actually, as you're talking, I'm writing down follow-up questions, and then you go up and you answered that as well. So it was good. I mean, it helps. I think, obviously we hear a lot about Anson Dorrance and the competitive cauldron. Raleigh, I go to you with just kind of a, Dan talked about the day-to-day doing a training, trying to compete, posting it up. Is there anything in your experience that you've done maybe a little bit differently? I know Anson also talks about there's an innate difference between coaching men, coaching women. Do you find that you need to do different things in the women's game, coaching that versus per se in the men's game?
I've never specifically coached men, I can say that, but at the college level, only at the club level. But at the college level, certainly working with females on a daily basis, I mean, almost similar to what Dan mentioned, we compete for everything at Brown, whether it's in a possession activity or transition game or an 8v8 game or whatnot. Everything is competitive, and the losers have a punishment, whether it's sprints or push-ups or burpees. That makes our girls realize and then internalize is that winning is rewarded and losing is not. And I think that although it's a question later on, with the trophy culture and whatnot, I think it's a very good thing to continually instill in our team, because when that is implemented, people will do whatever it takes to win. I don't want to run that last sprint. We're going to find a way to win. We're tired. We've already ran 10 sprints, but we have to find a way to pull out a win, to find a goal, to defend a goal, whatever that may be. And so I truly believe that, it's every activity that we keep those results, and we don't post them for the most part, but every day we say it's a clean slate. You can start over if you weren't, if you didn't compete to the level you wanted to compete yesterday. Today's, we say wake up and earn the day, and then of course get better every day. And I think that's one thing that we do is, we say, all right, yesterday was yesterday. Let's move on today. Can you be competitive today? Can you be the best center back for your team today, or the best forward for your team today, and carry out the traits that per that position are going to help the team that you're playing on today win. And yes, we do video sessions, and when we do video sessions, we do talk about the competitive side of things, saying, do you want to win the ball back? And of course, every girl's going to say yes, but then we'll go to the next point. Well, what are you doing to win the ball back? Let's get up, let's get off the ground, let's retreat, let's recover and whatnot. And then we'll talk about that in training, and we'll really get after them for that until it becomes so instinctual that we don't have to. And I think that making those steps and making those gains, so to speak, really do make all the difference in your team from August to November, when you are playing at the in the college season in the fall. I would say working at the club level with boys, which I have done in the past, very similar to what I just spoke about. Everything, winners are rewarded and losers are not. And it's not a negative attribute in any way, shape, or form. I don't see it that way. We're not demeaning them. It's just, again, instilling the qualities that we believe that if you're at the club level and you want to play at the college level, instilling the qualities that are going to be asked of you come 2-3 years. And I don't think that, there's anything wrong with implementing that. And I don't think anybody would, disagree with that. And so that's truly been my experience working with both men and women. And to be honest with you, I really do agree with Dan in all of his points, because, he talked about it being a forefront in the recruiting process, and then also a forefront in training. And I couldn't agree more.
Good. You do bring up an interesting point, and I thought, Ben, I would ask you this, based off of what Raleigh said. Do you find a difference, and not that there's a right or wrong, and this is simply a question because I'm curious myself, but do you find a difference in rewarding, or the benefits of, say, rewarding winning versus punishing losing?
Yeah, I think it's a topic we could debate for hours on end, because everybody's got a different philosophy, and a lot of those come from experiences and what they've read or been through themselves. For what I believe in, and more how we operate at Oregon State, we're going to focus on the positive of things. We're not a professional team yet, and so our job is to develop these guys, although most of them, at our level want to be professionals, and we're trying to prepare them to do that on the field approach. So we're talking about, keeping score of things as Dan did at his Division III school, and Raleigh does at Brown. We're also doing some of that with things off the field. And so we're going to focus on the winning and what it takes to win, rather than losing, because ultimately we've all lost games. And I think, in the game of soccer especially, it's the result's not always fair. So you're going to lose games, but we want to focus on, okay, hey, I won today. And then, like Raleigh said, what did you do to win today? And so those are the things that we kind of highlight the most, and it allows the guys to look that the details do matter, being on time, having the right mentality, preparing themselves, et cetera, et cetera. All those things add up to what they're going to do on the field. And so we kind of focus on that and more, and that's more my personal belief. But I do know that there have been other successful, programs and coaches who have taken a different stance.
Okay. And so, Laura, we're going to change it a little bit with you, and it has been brought up. I know Raleigh mentioned it, and it's something that is pretty heavily debated and talked about a lot in recent. I think social media gives life to it a little bit more. It's probably been something going on in coaching circles for a while, but there's this big kind of dissatisfaction with as far as coaches whose profession is to win games at the higher levels, at the elite levels, with the participation trophy culture. Everybody deserves a trophy just for playing. What are your thoughts on that, and kind of how does that hinder competitiveness, and then how can we potentially change that culture to benefit developing more competitive players?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously such a huge topic. Everyone talks about it, from the club level all the way through to, the youth, all the way through to college level. And I think, in my personal opinion and in my experience, I think that the participation trophy culture definitely hinders. I think there's two different types of motivation. There's the intrinsic motivation that you have inside yourself to be motivated to play. And then there's extrinsic motivation. You want to try and get a reward. You want to try and, get this trophy. And I think that if you go along the lines of the participation trophy culture, you're really not teaching kids that playing the game itself is a reward. Even all the way through to the college level, if you really start at the lowest level and you have that trophy and that reward from the very beginning, when they get through to high school and they're trying to be recruited, you really don't know, is that kid just looking for the reward of a scholarship and that's it, that's their job done? Or are they actually enjoying the game? Because I think when it comes to the competitive mindset, like has been discussed, like Ben has talked about, you win and you lose. And I think the difference between those that have that intrinsic motivation and those that don't is that they can really deal with losing. And if you don't actually have the love of the game, then I don't think, and you haven't had that fun just through purely playing the game and not just for the reward, I think you're going to struggle to really get through those losses. I think that just from the very beginning, just showing up is not enough. And if you're giving a reward to players just for showing up, at the root, that's just a problem, I believe. And especially in my experience in the college game, when we tried to be really, really competitive in practice, and we actually did the photo thing, but that's not a trophy. That's not something that you can, like, it's not a reward in a sense. Like, it kind of is, but it's not the one thing that the kids are going out to get every single day. That's not the reason they play the game. Whereas if you have this participation trophy culture, you show up for a 5v5 tournament, or you show up for, an 11v11 tournament, you're going out to get that trophy. And if you know you're going to get it, if you get 5th place, then you might be okay with 5th place. And I think that really ruins that competitive aspect of the sport itself.
So then, if we kind of circle back to you, and I know you had talked about one of the things that you try to focus on is bringing in naturally competitive players. And obviously there's some players that do, as Laura mentioned, there's the intrinsic versus the kind of an external motivation. You have some kids that even in school, my wife's a teacher, so I relate a lot of things to education, but you'll have kids that they get good grades, they get a bigger allowance, or they can buy a new video game if they're, so do you feel that there's a big difference in kids that, as far as which is maybe a better type of competitiveness, how we can try to, again, develop more of an intrinsically motivated player? Obviously the trophy is a little more external, so how do we then develop more players to be naturally competitive? Do you think we can? I know you said it's easier obviously to have a already competitive player, but do you think there's ways we could develop from a younger age to give them a little more intrinsic motivation?
Yeah, I think that's a challenging question. I've looked at just the idea of intrinsic motivation, even not from the standpoint. So in the college game, grades are obviously important. Had some guys, teams who were on the struggling with grades and struggling with just really simple things like going to class, with getting assignments in on time, things that were very much within their control, had nothing to do with their intelligence or their IQ, just very much to do with their own motivation. And that was a question that I struggled with, just because how do you make somebody else want to do something? I think that absolutely intrinsic motivation is the best thing. I think that there's been plenty of research done. There was a book written by Daniel Pink called Drive. He talks about intrinsic motivation versus kind of this idea of carrots and sticks, carrots being reward, sticks being punishment. I'd have to remember, he talks about the three kind of intrinsic motivators, things that lead to intrinsic motivation, being autonomy, so giving somebody just kind of control over something like their own schedule, or their control over other things. Mastery, just helping somebody to excel at a specific task. And then the last thing is purpose, kind of the reason for doing things. I guess I'm kind of maybe even getting away from your question, but I think if you can offer an individual those three things, that'd probably be my best answer: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. That you're probably getting at how to help somebody become more intrinsically motivated.
Okay. So if we've kind of talked about different things in terms of going forward with implementing this. So we talked about some of the things that we've done with training as far as making it competitive, keeping score. I know, Dan, you talked about posting a picture of winners in the locker room of that day. Raleigh, I want to come back to you, and I want to ask, just, what are some ways of continuing to implement that maybe aren't that kind of the competitive culture that we talked about that Anson Dorrance has implemented, but more somewhat out of the box ways that you can develop competition or a competitive mindset in training, or even outside of training?
Yeah. That's a very good question. And I think of myself as a player, and when I was developing both in club and at the college level, what intrinsically motivated me, other than, losers have sprints or whatnot. But one thing I really enjoyed, and I try to implement this with my team now, and with the players that we coach at Brown, I love being vocal. So, as soon as we lose the ball, get back, and just having that positive energy instead of saying, why did you lose the ball? It's over with, but now what do we do to fix it? And so I think just being vocal and having that energy, I think, is going to instill that in players. Definitely more so than screaming or, berating a negative trait. I also do think too, one thing that we always do is, we always will group text the team saying, hey, so-and-so is playing today on TV. We're going to have the game on in our office. And, they'll come in and out in between classes, and they'll be able to watch that game and talk to us about, the tactics, or, so-and-so's playing style. And just that in and of itself makes the girls love soccer a little bit more and enjoy it from an outsider's perspective. And that's something that I enjoyed with, doing that with my dad, who's also a collegiate coach. I know that not everyone has that in their own backyard, but just having that to be able to go home and enjoy soccer outside of the playing field, I think that made me intrinsically, when I got to the playing field myself, view it as such a privilege to be on the field and be able to play, and recognize that not everybody does have the opportunities that, I have for the next hour and a half of my life. And so just knowing that made me want to obviously be better for myself, be better for my teammates around me, and play hard for the coaches that were coaching me. And so as I move forward into my own coaching career, I do think that just having energy on the sidelines, I think that does absolutely develop, a competitive mindset and a positive competitive mindset, as well as watching the game of soccer itself and just enjoying it and talking about it from, a tactic standpoint. You could laugh about something, you can enjoy something, you can clap, you can inject your own opinion and have a conversation. And I think those things show your humanity also to your players. And when they see that in you, I think that they're going to want to compete more for you and, develop a mindset, whether they understand or realize it or whatnot. I think that those can be out of the box things that perhaps help down the line and in the future. And I really do, I do believe that, because I do think that those are things that have helped me in my youth and hopefully in other people's youth as well.
Good. Being with soccer being a year-round sport, and especially at the collegiate level, Ben, I turned to you and I wanted to ask, again, there's sometimes we need to break up what is. We don't want it to be monotonous, but we have to break things up and still be able to be competitive, but maybe have a slight change in how we do that. So, one of the things that I've done in college, we do at the start of each season, kind of like an Olympic event. So we have different events that the week culminated with synchronized swimming. And there was so much effort put into synchronized swimming by each group. I mean, it was incredible. But it gives a different taste of competition that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with soccer, but still tries to make the competition a focus and a forefront, whilst not just being like, you have to win, you have to win, you have to win. Are there things you guys have done either at Oregon State or in your background that that you think are helpful or could be useful for people in trying to implement and develop the competition amongst their team?
Yeah, I mean, I do. I think it starts with what we've said before, and that's obviously for us bringing in the right guys. So it starts with who you recruit, campus, and you've got your team, and you're probably in August in preseason. I think you've got to be together on and off the field as much as possible, and so a lot of the books Dan's brought up. One of the kind of the key words, especially in today, I feel like in coaching, regardless of the sport, you hear a lot of college coaches talk about culture. And I think this kind of goes hand in hand to your team culture. For us, we want to be a pretty close-knit team. And so we'll do a lot off the field. I think the swimming idea is fantastic. We do a bowling competition. We'll do like a team building activity on a high ropes course. We've done paintball before. We brought outsiders in who, I know some teams have brought in like Navy SEAL trainer and they just push them to the extreme physically. It has nothing to do with their sport, but you kind of hit that adversity topic that I think Raleigh touched on earlier. And then how do you respond from that? So there's a ton we do off the field. Even just eating together and joking. We do a grades competition. A lot of different things to just make sure that the guys realize everything adds up. Like I said, we take a pretty holistic approach. So it's going to be on and off the field for us. And really kind of to go back to that culture word, we do a lot to emphasize the team as well. So, it's like the individuals are winning, but all of that leads to the team's success. And so I think it's important for especially a young kid, maybe an 18, 19-year-old freshman, see that, hey, what I'm doing, making myself better every day, even if it's in something silly like a swimming competition or a bowling competition, it actually is helping the team because my mentality, my approach, being close to these guys, kind of having that family, the family feel in the team room, all those things are going to translate to wins on the field. And so, those are kind of the three things that I would sum it up is you got to bring in the right players once they're there. It's a ton of team building and building that winning culture, and showing the guys what it's like to win and what it takes to do that, whether that's on or off the field. And then obviously emphasizing a lot of the team goals so that they can see, hey, just because, I've done all these things and I'm having a great week, the team could be struggling. And so what then can I do to make sure that the guys around me, are also getting better? And so making sure that they understand that the individual, equates to what the team's doing.
And then Laura, with you and your programs and your experiences where you've been, is there ways that you've done things that maybe you try to bring a little bit more of a competitive attitude out of somebody that doesn't necessarily seem to have that natural, but still trying to fit them in with the team? So I thought that Ben brought up a really good point of it's got to be a team approach. Obviously, it's a team sport. We can't have necessarily 5 players that want to show up and compete and then 6 on the field that are just there because they have to be. Are there ways that you've done different things to try to bring your whole team together to have that sort of focus in the right mindset of a competition?
Yeah, I think most importantly, especially if you're in a team, college, for example, which is the kind of realm that I'm in, the most important thing is to have that team goal and that team drive. I think that the players themselves need to know exactly what your aims are as a coach, and as a whole, whether you want to make the conference tournament, whether you're trying to score X amount of goals. I know there's been a ton of different ways. There's a ton of different ways in which you can kind of bring about a team goal. I think individually is as important. And as a coach, I think we need to look at ourselves and make sure that we are giving players enough feedback, that we are talking to them in the correct way so that they're able to really thrive and create their own competitive mindset. Because, you know, if you've always recruited a certain type of player and they're very, very vocal, you know, say they're a centre back and they've always been very vocal and they've always been someone that you can obviously see that competitive drive with, there's other certain players that haven't mastered that. And so you need to find, and it's tough, you know, with the college season being so small, being so short, you need to find the way in which that person is competitive. You know, if you actually have conversations with players, sometimes you'll find that they are very, very hard on themselves internally. And you need to know that so that when you are talking to them and when you're giving them feedback, you can help them grow. You know, like I've said before, and like we've all touched on, you want it to be a very developmental thing. So if there's someone that you find and someone that you see that might not be thriving and might not have that outward competitive mindset, it's, can you help them compete with themselves? Can you help them improve from practice to practice? And you'll see that competitive drive come out of them, or in my experience, at least, that's kind of the best way I've seen that to happen. Because I think the biggest, in my experience at least, when you start pitting the players against each other, if you start saying, hey, you're not up to this player standard, that's why you're not playing, I think you'll see a decrease in that person's competitive drive and performance, other than trying to just beat that player down as much as they can. I think if you put the onus on them, if you make sure that you are giving them, you know, like Dan said, the autonomy, you have control. If you do this, this will help you get on the field. I'm not saying that that's going to make you're going to 100% play if you get to that level, but this is what you can do yourself, what you're not relying on someone else to do to get you better. And I think if everybody has that mindset and everyone has that drive to improve themselves, rather than, we say compete, we're talking about competitive mindset, but you're competing 1v1v1v1, I think you're going to find, I think in my experience, you'll find that you're more successful if you do it that way.
And I think that's a great point, because it sort of segues into my next question. Obviously, it's tough when you are you're trying to encourage young people to be competitive. You want them to challenge each other, to challenge themselves. But then how do you balance that? And I think, Ben, you talked about it well, excuse me, in your last point. But I kind of wanted to circle back to it with Gino Auriemma had a big press conference recently in the women's basketball tournament where he talked about if players on the sideline are not cheering for their teammates who are being successful and doing well, they're not getting in the game. Obviously, you know, as Laura touched about, there's a tough balance at times of wanting players to do better than perhaps the player that's playing ahead of them, versus really focusing on being the best that they can be. So how do you balance that competitive mentality with team chemistry? Because at the end of the day, we need that team chemistry for the whole group to be successful.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I did see that press conference. I thought that was pretty awesome. You know, I would say this. I think what we do, and this is something I'm going to do for the rest of my career, I think it's fantastic. We've made such a big emphasis on culture. Part of, you know, if you followed Oregon State and our program at all, you know, we've had a ton of talents and still hasn't equated to as much success as we like. And so when you take a look back, the key word that keeps coming is the culture. And that can be, you know, it's such a broad term, and you can kind of take, you know, any personal nugget from that word that you want and make it your own. But for us, what that is everybody knowing their role and having everybody on the same page. And so, you know, said if it's all individual goals and everybody's kind of pitted against one another, it's going to lead to a lot less wins. So for us, something that we've done a lot is we meet with guys on a weekly basis. Even in the season, we call them core meetings. And what these meetings are is, it's essentially, to sum them up, they just define the role of every player. And so if you're on the back end of the roster, or if you've come in on little scholarship and you know that, we've been honest with you from the process, your goal is then to try to make the travel squad. And if you're in the travel squad but you're not getting minutes, your goal is to then climb your way up to where you're off the bench. And if you're coming off the bench but you're not starting, then obviously you want to be starting. And so having those meetings and those honest conversations, it gives all 28 to 30 guys on our team a real defined role. And so they understand, hey, I've got some, first of all, I've got the coach's trust, and my team, I've got the teammates love me because of our team building. The coaches trust me. They're honest with me. They communicate with me. So here's where I'm at. And then from there, they can self-evaluate and say, okay, well, I'm probably a year away from starting since I'm not even traveling. But what I know is I've got to push the guy in front of me that's right on the bubble. And so then when it comes to game and he's on the bench, or when it comes to the travel squad and we're on the road, everybody's on the same page. All 28 guys are fully supportive, of one another, really. And it's kind of a cool way for us to continue to communicate, roles and define those as we move forward. So for us, the development probably doesn't take place as much as far as the competitive mentality goes, because we're going to be pretty strict on making sure they have that when they walk in the door here. So with that being said, those meetings are more about defining roles and making sure that everything's ticking. And that's, for us, what our culture is supposed to look like, is everybody's working towards the same goal, regardless of what their role is and necessarily, their pathway to achieving their dreams.
So then, Dan, with that kind of frame set in mind, with trying to, again, we talk about trying to get players to be their best. And obviously, if a player wants to start, you have to give them tools to be better and try to find a way to start. How do you go about, again, trying to encourage that competition between teammates, but then also having that support if maybe one player beats another out? How do you kind of balance that with being teammates but also being competitors?
Yeah, I do think it's challenging. I mentioned that there's not a lot of difference in some ways between kind of the college environment and then the pro environment. I would say the really big difference, probably, I don't know, at least right now, is just the rules, in that we get 3 substitutions. It was 5 last year in USL. It's now 2. And so we've got a roster of, I think it's 25 field players, which just means that if we're using all 14 available, or let's just say field players, if we have 25 field players, we use all available players, that's 13 field players. That means there's a lot of guys that just never see the field. That creates separation, and that's something that we don't want to have, but the rules just very much dictate that unless we're going to really work from game to game to get different guys in, there's become a separation with our team that we don't love. We've addressed kind of the issue of some of that separation and some of the competition within the team through individual meetings. It's less standardized than what Ben has said. It's just been more, hey, I feel like we need to talk to this guy at this point, and we'll pull him aside after training or text them to come in for a meeting. I think meetings are very valuable just to make sure that everybody's on the same page. I think that the biggest challenge, and this is the challenge in any kind of team environment, is just to stress the team and just the importance of it always being about the team, about everything being about the team. And so I've thought about this question. I think, as I mentioned, I had the opportunity to be a head coach for a couple of years, and it challenged me in new ways just to stand in front of a group and to ask a group of guys to kind of sacrifice for the betterment of the group. And then I'm like, okay, why should they do that? I think that's a big question. And I think I've kind of looked at it like what we want ultimately from everybody. And a lot of the panelists, a lot of us have kind of said that it's the reason to be on a team is to be at your best. That's the reason that you're playing soccer, is to try to develop and to try to be at your personal best. I think the best way to do that is within a kind of a high performance team. And so, really, if you're on that team and you're hurting the team by being selfish, it's ultimately not in your best interest. It's ultimately in your best interest to try to push the team forward. Everybody becomes better when the team is better. And so, yeah, I think it's a bit the word paradoxical or whatever, just that you're kind of sacrificing your own best interest is actually the best thing for you. And so that's maybe how I try to have a conversation with somebody.
Okay. And then, Raleigh, I wanted to ask you something that maybe as assistant coaches, we don't always think about, I'm in my first head coaching position at Holy Names, and it's been something that's been a bit difficult for me to a certain extent. Is as an assistant coach, you can you still don't want to identify with all players, but you oftentimes can identify with players that fit you a little bit better or share a similar mindset as you. Whereas as a head coach, you really have to relate to everyone. How do you think, in terms of coaches, or thoughts on coaches relating to players who may not? I mean, I would assume a lot of us we're very competitive as players. We are still coaching, and I would assume we're all very competitive as coaches. Oftentimes you will get that player who you kind of say, I just don't understand, why are they not that competitive? Do you have thoughts on ways to kind of work around that?
So one thing that we do during preseason is we have the girls write down what motivates them and what coaching styles have motivated them in the past, and perhaps what has also deterred them in the past. And we keep those in a folder. And when problems arise, such as that, we'll go back, say, they wrote that down in August and it's October and they start to fade for some reason. We'll look at that and we'll call them in for a meeting similar to what Ben spoke about. And we bring it up and we say, you're telling us that this works for you, and we're giving you this, but there's something that's not clicking. What's going on? And I think that having that transparency as a coaching staff, whether it's coming from a head coach or coming from one of your assistants, I think that that's so important, because, there could be something that's going on that they're like, well, I actually think this, or, it's not clicking because of A, B, and C. But having the transparency and the open communication is the only way, in my opinion, and I think the rest of my coaching staff's opinion as well, to solve that. And also, too, I think that your captains can be a great resource. You can contact them and just ask, you've been on the field with her. We coach her, but you're the one that's playing alongside her or playing against her every day. And, what do you know? Because that can also be another resource that I think can be a means to solve a problem and to kind of dig through the surface and see what the real issue is, and how we can get them to perform their best, and how we can coach them to be their best, whether that's, they need to know 3 things they do well and 3 things they do poorly, or, they want to be yelled at on the field, or they want to be pulled aside privately. I think, everyone's different and has a different background. So I think having that transparency within your captains and within that specific person is very crucial.
And then, Laura, I'll give you a chance as well. Just any of your thoughts in terms of the competitive mentality and balancing that with team chemistry.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it is tough when effectively you're having players compete against each other, and then you're asking them to be good friends off the field or be supportive teammates. And that's always a tough question that we come across. And I think the video you were talking about earlier with the UConn women's basketball team it kind of is a reward versus a punishment, because he's saying, if you don't support your teammates, you're not going to play. And so that would be number one. It's, again, the team is first. We want to win as a team. Everybody plays a role. If you have a squad of 30 players and you're only traveling 20 players, there's going to be 10 players left at home, and those individuals need to know that it is in their best interest to be the best teammates that they can. And again, I don't want to harp on the same points, but making sure that you have that communication with those players at home, that you're not a practice player, you're not a role player, but you need to know your role. If they're a freshman or, you're developing them, they should know that. If they have had a couple of bad practices and they are not, or a couple of bad weeks of practice and they are not traveling, or they are unfit and they are not traveling and they're not playing, those are all things that they need to know. And then putting that responsibility on them as an individual, I think helps to alleviate the stress of them feeling like it's them against the other player, because it's not the other player's fault that they're not playing. That's the number one. I mean, it does get tough when you have 2 very like players that, and you have to pick one of them to play. Say if you're playing 1 target forward, you have to pick one of them. But it is not that other player's fault that they're not playing. There's something else that player can be developed, or the system that you're playing just doesn't accommodate. And that just needs to be communicated, I think. And a lot of the time it goes well. A lot of the time those players will accept that, and if they're competitive, they will try and do what you tell them because you have communicated that. And other times you will just find players that maybe because they're too competitive, they just want to play. They find trouble with that, and maybe they need to move on elsewhere, or they just don't do what it takes, and then they have to find a new role on the team. So yeah.
Good. Well, it's been an incredible discussion. I do want to kind of end the chat with things. Obviously, being able to be on a chat like this or a forum like this where we can discuss these things is a great resource for coaches to develop. I'm going to kind of give each of you a chance to share, maybe your best resource in terms of developing or kind of ways that you've learned to develop a mindset. And Raleigh, we'll start with you with that.
So I guess just bring it down to one. Recently, we invited a guest speaker to speak at our team banquet. And I think that she promoted in her speech, how she's overcome adversity and the positivity that that's really fueled her to be, competitive with herself, of course, but then also to how to have that outlook within not just an athletic perspective, but also, once you do graduate and you do enter the workforce and you do enter other realms of life that don't exist within the college bubble. And I think so having a speaker or, having your team watch a podcast if you can't get a speaker, and having that team culture hone in around that topic for the day or for the week and make that a huge emphasis with your next couple training sessions or your next couple team chats. I think having that focus can make all of the difference. And, doing that, whether I said it's a speaker or a podcast a few times a year, and having that focus, I think can really emphasize points and help people grow as athletes too.
And you sounded like you had a couple others. So, if you had another couple good ones, I don't want to take those away from you. I can give you a chance to share them.
No, they're no secrets. I was just going to say that, in our staff meetings, we all, have a chance to talk about what's helped us in the past, or, when we were a part of other staffs, what worked and what didn't work. And so it's just, conversations amongst your staff and talking from previous examples with your background, and then also previous things that, for us worked last fall that we're hoping to work again in the fall, or things that didn't work last fall that we're not going to, implement again in the fall. So just experiences and people that along the way. And obviously this group here being a tremendous resource, and knowing that you have 30 other people to bounce ideas off of, I think has been so great as well.
Good. And Ben, we'll turn to you. Any thoughts on resources?
Yeah, those are all great ones. I think, the first thing that comes to mind, Raleigh kind of mentioned, is just your network. We all can't be at 200 plus programs in our career and have all these experiences. So having a network, a close group of friends who can relate with you. And some of your network doesn't even have to be in college soccer necessarily, or in the realm that you're in, but it definitely can help. And so having a network, I think, Dan's hit on a lot of books. I think reading as coaches is massive, and just trying to get your hands on, whether it's articles, some small video like the one you mentioned on with UConn women's basketball, or different books. And then, funny enough, like I even think there are some behind the scenes shows out there that are actually pretty good, and they're not all in soccer. So I think it's okay to not be afraid to look at, other sports like American football or basketball or those kind of things that maybe get a little bit more media attention. But there are some pretty good shows out there that kind of give you a glimpse of what other successful coaches are doing behind the scenes to build their program or build a competitive mindset, build a culture, things like that.
And Dan, I know you're a heavy reader. Do you have one book in particular that's a favorite of yours?
I mentioned Dance Endurance. I love The Man Watching. It's by Tim Crothers. That guy, he's a volunteer assistant for their program actually for 4 years, like as an author, which I think gives him a really interesting perspective. And maybe a lesser known one. This actually, he talks about this guy in his book, which is what pushed me towards it. But Daniel Chambliss, the book Champions. It's about swimmers. It's a super interesting book that I haven't seen referenced a lot. But if I were to mention one other thing too, and I guess Raleigh kind of hit on it in terms of a guest speaker. Guest speakers may or may not always be available. We've used videos within our team, kind of in a sense, a guest speaker. We've listened to watch videos on a guy like Steph Curry, just kind of holding models of competitiveness up in front of our guys, just as examples and models. We do quite a bit of things like that, whether it's our head coach even just talking, and we've got basically a black book that we got just a black notebook, and guys take notes. Sometimes we give them very specific things to write in, and so that helps to, I think, fuel anything we want culturally. Ben's brought up culture quite a bit, but certainly competitiveness as well.
And then, Laura, I'll give you a chance to kind of wrap it up in terms of resources or thoughts you might have.
Yeah, I mean, this is a little bit more specific maybe to the college game, but in my past experiences actually at all the schools I've been, that we've had kind of sports psychologists come and work with the team and make it a little bit more individual, finding out what makes them tick. I think the consistency of having that person working with the team week by week is something that has been very vital to all the teams I've worked with. Some of the videos and the guest speakers we've done, I think they work very, very intensely for like a week or so, and then they kind of trail off a little bit. So in the season, for example, you know, showing those videos every couple of weeks, I think is very, very helpful because it just gets them up for games. But when you get to the spring and it's just like a long haul of 8 months of no real competitive soccer, I think having that time where those players reflect on themselves, and you can either, you know, have someone that's a professional in the field, or, you know, invest in programs that give you kind of the self, you can implement them yourself, can be helpful. And to be honest, it really, again, it puts the autonomy on the players where they can decide how much they want to buy into it. You know, they can work with them as much as they want, as little as they want, and then you can see those that are having improvements, and it's less of a kind of it's more of a personal thing with them, and that, because I think in my experience the players don't always want to deal with you as a coach. They get kind of sick of you and they want to talk to somebody completely different, and you hope that, you know, no offense to parents, like you want it to be someone who has some kind of training and not someone who has their best interests at heart all the time, that's going to give them what they want to hear. But again, that's kind of more from the college side, where you have the resources to do that. So
perfect.
All right. Well, thank you so much, guys. This has been a fantastic discussion. So I appreciate you all tuning in. Thanks to Michael, our moderator, for leading such a great chat, and all of our panelists, Ben, Dan, Laura, and Raleigh. Thanks to everyone who tuned in. Be sure to join us next month, May 10th, for our next chat. And we also have our Women Coach Educators chat happening next week, next Wednesday, starting at noon Central Standard Time. So be sure to tune in for that as well. So thanks, everybody, and have a great rest of your week.
Thank you.